It was just past midnight when it happened. The street was silent, the sky still, and the only sound was a soft hum of streetlights buzzing in the dark. But then came the noise. Tires screeched. A black SUV rolled up with its headlights off. In seconds, everything changed. The peace was shattered. A loud crash rang out, one that made the neighbors jump from their beds. The front door of a quiet house was kicked in, with splinters flew through the air. Flashlights danced through the rooms. Shouts followed, harsh voices yelling commands, men in plain clothes rushing in with weapons raised. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Drop a comment down below and let us know. The house belonged to Marcus Hill. From the outside, nothing about the home stood out. A single-story brick home with a clean yard, trimmed bushes, and a small American flag waving under the porch light. A car was parked neatly in the driveway. The porch had 2 rocking chairs. Everything about it screamed peaceful, stable, and calm. But inside that home, a storm was about to break loose. Marcus Hill had been asleep. He had no reason to be afraid. It was his day off. He had worked hard that week. He had cleaned the kitchen, watered the grass, and was even planning to cook breakfast the next morning for someone very special, his daughter, who hadn't been home in 3 weeks. He smiled before going to bed, already thinking about what pancakes she'd asked for. But now, that peaceful dream was over. A group of plainclothes officers stormed through his living room like a wrecking ball. They moved fast, shouting at Marcus to get on the ground. One kicked a chair out of the way. Another stepped on a photo frame that had fallen. The glass cracked under his boot. Flashlights blinded Marcus as he tried to figure out what was happening. He had no idea who they were. They didn't knock. They didn't announce themselves. They just came in, guns pointed, voices raised. No names, no questions, only orders. He froze in place, confused, alarmed, still half asleep. He raised his hands slowly. One of them shouted again, telling him to move faster. Another pushed him forward, forcing him to his knees. It wasn't just fear, it was disbelief. They didn't ask for ID. They didn't even check to see who he was. In that moment, Marcus realized something terrible. They weren't there for justice. They were there for a target. And to them, he looked like the target. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Marcus Hill was not just a homeowner. He was not just another black man living in a suburban neighborhood. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't a suspect. And he definitely wasn't someone to be taken lightly. Marcus Hill had served in law enforcement for over 20 years. He was a respected SWAT commander. He had led high-risk missions, trained officers, saved hostages, stopped threats. He knew every move they were making because he had taught those very same moves to dozens of others. But tonight, he wasn't treated like a commander. He was treated like a criminal, like someone who didn't belong in his own home. Just hours earlier, Marcus had been at the local community center, speaking to young recruits about the value of honor, discipline, and fairness in police work. He told them stories of moments when lives were saved because officers chose to listen, not just react. He spoke of courage and justice, of doing what was right. Even when it was hard, he told them, always know who you're dealing with. Don't assume, don't judge, and never let fear guide your hand. He had no idea that later that night, those very words would be tested. Back in the house, one of the officers walked into the kitchen. Another checked the back hallway. They were searching for something, or someone, but they hadn't said who. Still on the ground, Marcus spoke calmly, asking what they were doing. One of them told him to shut up. Another told him he was under investigation. For what? They didn't say. He looked up slowly, not afraid, not angry, just disappointed. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened to someone like him. But it was the first time it had happened to him. They didn't know the neighborhood. That was obvious. They didn't recognize the house. They didn't even stop to look at the numbers above the door. They just saw a black man in the house, assumed something was wrong, and acted. The most painful part wasn't the broken door or the shouting. It was the silence that followed after Marcus told them his name. He said it once, then again, I'm Commander Hill. This is my house. They didn't react. Either they didn't believe him, or they didn't care. One of them mumbled something under his breath. It wasn't loud, but Marcus heard it. A racist comment. It wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was something uglier, something deeper. Outside, a neighbor turned on her porch light. Another neighbor came out with phone, recording, and inside the house, Marcus Hill sat on the floor of his own home, surrounded by strangers who were supposed to protect people like him, not treat them like criminals. He looked around and saw the photo they had stepped on earlier. It was a picture of him in uniform, standing with the city's mayor. Another frame had fallen too. This one showed Marcus shaking hands with a group of kids during a school visit. Years of service, years of loyalty, all erased in seconds. But Marcus didn't shout. He didn't fight. He just sat there, waiting for the moment they'd realize what they had done. And slowly, he began to plan his next move. Because Marcus knew how these situations played out. He had studied them, taught them, written reports on them. But this time, it wasn't someone else. It was him. And this time, they raided the wrong house. The shouting got louder. The officers were still in the house, still moving fast, still acting like Marcus Hill was a threat. He stayed on the floor with his hands out in front of him, palms open. His voice was calm, but firm. He said again, "This is my home." But they didn't stop. One of them pushed his shoulder roughly, telling him not to move. Another officer shouted toward the hallway, calling out to someone else they thought might be hiding inside. But there was no one else. The house was empty. Marcus had told them that. Twice. They didn't listen. They didn't ask for proof. They were too deep into their own version of the story. The officers started opening doors, yanking drawers, looking through closets. It wasn't just a search, it was chaos. One of them knocked over a lamp. Another kicked open a bathroom door. They were still shouting commands like they were in some war zone. But there was no danger. There was no criminal. Just a man who lived alone and had done nothing wrong. Marcus watched all of it, still on his knees. He kept breathing slowly. He knew how this worked. If he made one sudden move, they might react badly. He'd seen it before. He'd read the reports. And now he was living inside one. He asked again, calmly, for them to check his ID. It was right there, his wallet on the counter. He offered to give them his name, his badge number, anything they needed. But one of them looked down at him and said, "Sure, you got a badge." The voice was filled with sarcasm, a smirk, a shake of the head. It wasn't just disbelief. It was judgment. They had already decided who he was, not based on his words, not based on his actions, but based on how he looked. Marcus felt the insult hit him, not just as a man, but as someone who had spent years trying to stop this kind of behavior from happening in the first place. He had trained people, hundreds of them, taught them how to enter a house, how to de-escalate, how to stay professional. He had warned them, over and over, that mistakes like these destroy trust. But now, that warning was being ignored by the very people who should have known better. And as the minutes dragged on, things only got worse. One officer, tall and nervous-looking, pulled Marcus to his feet and handcuffed him. Rough hands, cold metal, no explanation. Marcus didn't resist. He kept calm. He kept thinking. The hallway wall had photos of him in uniform, but no one even looked. One officer finally walked into the living room and noticed a plaque on the shelf. He read the name out loud, Commander Marcus Hill. The room got quiet for a second. Just a second. Then another officer muttered, "Could be fake." The doubt was louder than the silence. Marcus stared at him and said, "You've got the wrong house." But they still didn't want to believe it. They didn't check their GPS. They didn't confirm the address. They didn't double-check the warrant. They had stormed in with a story already made in their minds. And even when the truth stood right in front of them, they refused to see it. He asked again, "What exactly am I being accused of?" No clear answer came. One of them said, "You fit the description." Another one said, "There's a suspect connected to this location." But the address wasn't right. The suspect's name wasn't his. And none of their answers made sense. The worst part was hearing those words. "You fit the description." Marcus had heard that his whole life. Growing up, walking through stores, driving at night, even standing outside his own home. Now, even after years of wearing a badge, giving speeches, and saving lives, they still saw him as someone who fit something dangerous. Not because of anything he did, but because of the color of his skin. Outside, the neighbor with the phone was still filming. The red light on the camera kept blinking. Inside, one of the younger officers began to look uncomfortable. His eyes kept darting around the room. He looked at the medals, at the pictures, at Marcus, still standing tall even in handcuffs. He leaned toward another officer and whispered something. Marcus saw it. He saw the cracks beginning to show. One of them was realizing the truth. He spoke again, calmly. "Look at the badge on that shelf. My photo's there. You can scan the ID code." The younger officer walked over, picked it up. His eyes widened. Suddenly, his voice changed. Captain, we might have a problem." Another officer came over, looked at the badge, then at Marcus, then back at the badge. He cursed under his breath. They didn't want to believe it, but they couldn't deny it anymore. The man they had cuffed, searched, and pushed to the ground was a decorated SWAT commander. He had more field experience than all of them combined. The same man they had treated like a suspect was the man who helped write their department's raid protocols. The silence in the room stretched longer. One officer reached for his radio. He stepped out of the room. Marcus stayed still. He didn't smile. He didn't shout, "I told you so." He just waited, because even now, he knew how quickly things could still go wrong. Another officer removed the handcuffs, gently this time, avoided eye contact. Marcus rubbed his wrist but said nothing. The officer who had doubted him earlier looked at him now with something close to shame. But no one apologized. Not yet. Instead, they started backing away. One said they needed to check the files again. Another said it was possibly a mix-up. But Marcus knew what it really was. It was racism. It was profiling. It was a rush to judgment. And it was the exact kind of mistake he had warned about over and over again in training rooms and classrooms. One officer finally asked, "Are you really Commander Hill?" Marcus didn't answer with words. He walked to the wall and pulled down a shadow box. Inside were medals, stripes, and a photo of him shaking hands with the state governor. That was the answer. Another minute passed before the call came in. The officer who had stepped outside returned, looking pale. He cleared his throat and said, "We were supposed to hit 704 Cedar Drive." This was 704 Cedar Lane. Not the same house. Not the same street. They had read the address wrong. They had come in with wrong information, no backup confirmation, no address verification, and no plan B. And it could have cost Marcus his life. If he had moved too quickly, if he had reached for his wallet the wrong way, if he had said the wrong word too loud, things could have ended very differently. The officers looked around, now realizing what they had done. They had not just raided the wrong house. They had humiliated a respected leader. They had embarrassed their department. They had exposed their own broken methods. And they had done it all on camera. Marcus looked at the young officer, the only one who had even shown a bit of doubt. "You were the only one who looked at the evidence," he said. The officer nodded quietly. No one else spoke, because now it was clear this wasn't just a mistake. It was a warning about how deep assumptions can go, and how dangerous it is when power is used without thought. Marcus sat down on the edge of his couch. His heart was still beating hard, his hands still trembling, but his voice stayed calm, because the story wasn't over. Not even close. Marcus sat on his couch long after the officers left. The house was a mess. Drawers were open, furniture was moved, paper scattered on the floor. The broken lamp still lay in the corner, but the silence was louder than the damage. It filled the room like smoke after fire. He sat quietly, trying to collect his thoughts, trying to understand what had just happened. He was not confused. He knew exactly what had taken place. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a simple mistake. It was a failure of training, of leadership, of respect. And it wasn't new. This kind of failure had been happening for years, just not always to people who could speak out. But this time, they had raided the wrong house, and the house belonged to the wrong man. Or maybe, finally, the right one. He stood up slowly and walked through each room. He checked every corner. He touched the marks they left behind. His training made him notice everything. The scuff on the wall where a boot hit, the closet door that had been forced open, the coffee mug now lying in pieces on the floor. These were little things, but they told a big story. He reached for his phone. His fingers hovered for a moment before he called his lawyer. The voice on the other end picked up quickly, calm, professional. But when Marcus explained what happened, there was a long pause. Then the lawyer asked, "Are you all right?" Marcus said yes, but it didn't feel true. He was alive. He was breathing. But all right? Not really. He agreed to meet the lawyer in the morning. For now, he had something else to do. He walked into his bedroom and opened a locked drawer. Inside were documents, letters, and a thick folder labeled Training and Protocol Violations. He had kept it for years. He had written down every incident he heard about in the department that made him uneasy. Every time a rule was bent. Every time an officer crossed the line. Some had been punished. Most had not. He added a new page to that folder. Date, time, names of officers. If he remembered, what they said, what they did, how they didn't apologize, and how none of them checked the address before kicking in the door. He wrote all of it down line by line, not because he needed proof, but because truth mattered, and this truth needed to be told in full. The next morning, Marcus wore his uniform, not because he had to. He was off duty now, but he wore it for a reason. People needed to see that he had earned every stripe on that sleeve, that he didn't just talk about honor. He lived it. He walked into the lawyer's office and sat across the table. The lawyer looked at him and said, "They messed up big." Marcus said, "They didn't just mess up, they exposed themselves." They discussed the law, what options he had, whether to sue the department, whether to go public, whether to press charges. The lawyer said it would be a long fight, hard, complicated, political, but Marcus didn't care. He had fought hard battles before. This time it was personal. The lawyer asked what he wanted most. Money? A public apology? A policy change? Marcus looked out the window before answering. Then he said, "I want them to feel what I felt. I want them to understand the fear, the humiliation, the anger, and I want them to know they can't do this again." Later that day, Marcus got a call from someone in internal affairs, a man with a cold voice and a careful tone. He said they were reviewing the incident. He asked if Marcus would be willing to come in for a statement. Marcus agreed, but his voice was sharper now. He said, "I'll give you a statement, but I expect action." When he walked into the internal affairs building, people stared. Some nodded. Others looked away. They had all heard what happened. Word travels fast in law enforcement. But most didn't know how to react when the victim was someone in uniform. The interview was long. They asked questions, and Marcus gave honest answers. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He told the story as it was. He even remembered small details, what each officer said, where they were standing, how they reacted when they realized their mistake. The investigator kept writing notes, but Marcus could tell he was shocked. When it ended, Marcus asked a question of his own. "Are the officers still working?" The investigator said yes, they were on duty, pending review. Marcus nodded slowly. "Then we have a problem," he said. After the interview, he sat in his car for a while. The anger wasn't burning anymore. It had settled into something deeper, a kind of steady fire that wouldn't go out. He knew the road ahead. There would be meetings, news stories, pushback, maybe even threats. But he was ready. That night, he called an old friend, a reporter he trusted. He told her everything. She listened in silence, then said, "Do you want the story out there?" Marcus said, "Yes," every word. She promised to protect his identity if needed. He said, "No, use my name." The next morning, the story was everywhere. Decorated SWAT Commander mistaken for criminal in raid. Photos of his uniform, his medals, his bruised wrists. The video from the neighbor's phone showed the moment the officers barged in, guns raised. People were shocked, but not everyone. Some said it was a mistake. Others said it was racism. The truth was, it was both. Messages poured in. From friends, strangers, even officers from other cities. Some offered support. Others stayed silent. But silence, Marcus knew, said just as much. One message stood out. It was from the young officer, the only one who looked at the evidence during the raid. He said, "I'm sorry. I should have said something sooner." Marcus replied, "You said enough. Now say it to your department." That same week, Marcus was called into a meeting with the police chief. The chief looked tired, like someone who had been under pressure for a long time. He said he wanted to apologize in person. He said it was unacceptable. He said the officers would be suspended. But Marcus looked him in the eye and asked, "How did they get it so wrong?" The chief didn't answer right away. Then he said something Marcus didn't expect. "Because we stopped listening. We stopped looking deeper. We trained them to follow orders, not question them. That's on us." Marcus nodded. "Then fix it." The next few days were busy. News interviews, emails, community meetings. People wanted to hear from Marcus. They wanted to know how he stayed calm, how he didn't lose his cool. He told them the truth. It was experience. It was pain. It was years of watching things like this happen to others, and knowing it could happen to him too. A town hall was scheduled. The mayor came. So did other leaders. The room was packed. Marcus stood on stage in uniform. Cameras flashed, but his voice stayed steady. He told the crowd exactly what happened. He didn't water it down. He didn't hide the shame or the fear or the facts. He said, "I was treated like a criminal in my own home, not because I did anything wrong, but because someone didn't look twice, because someone assumed, and because I was black." The room was quiet. Some people nodded. Others looked down, but no one interrupted. He continued, "This is not just about me. This is about every person who was hurt but couldn't speak. Every kid who grew up scared of the police. Every family broken by a badge used the wrong way. If this could happen to me, a commander, what do you think is happening to everyone else?" The mayor stood up and promised change. He said the policies would be reviewed. Officers would get new training. But Marcus didn't clap. He said, "Don't make promises. Make progress." That night, back home, Marcus walked through his house again. Things were cleaner now, but the memories were still fresh. He sat down and opened a journal. He wrote, "Day 3, the fight begins now." He wasn't doing it for revenge. He was doing it for truth, for justice, for change. He knew it would take time. He knew some people would resist. But he also knew something else. People were watching. And this time, they were listening too. He received a call from a young man in another city. He said he wanted to become a police officer, but was scared. He asked, "Can you still be good in a broken system?" Marcus answered, "You could be the reason it changes." And that, more than anything, gave him hope. The raid was over. The bruises would fade. But the mission was clear. He wasn't just a commander anymore. He was a voice, a witness, a storm they didn't see coming. And he was just getting started. The morning sun was warm, but Marcus felt something colder in his chest. It wasn't fear anymore. It wasn't even anger. It was weight. The kind of weight you carry when the world finally notices what you've been saying for years. After everything, his phone still buzzed with new messages. People kept calling, asking him to come speak, share his story, show his scars. Everyone wanted to hear from a man whose own team had treated him like a threat in his own home. But Marcus didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired and awake. He had always known what the system was capable of. But now the world had seen it too. The images didn't lie. The bruises didn't lie. The silence from the officers didn't lie. He stood in front of the mirror that morning. His uniform hung neatly on the hanger beside him, but he didn't put it on this time. Today wasn't about what he wore. Today was about what he stood for. He buttoned a plain shirt, picked up his car keys, and headed to a new meeting. Not one called by the department, but by the people at the city center. The crowd was larger than expected. Local leaders were there, activists, reporters, young people, older folks who had seen the cycle repeat for decades. And in the middle of it all stood a table with a single sign, Community Oversight Proposal. It was something Marcus had worked on quietly for years. A plan to make officers answer to the people they served. A way to give citizens power, to review what happens behind the blue wall. No secrets, no cover-ups, just truth. He stepped to the microphone. The noise of the crowd faded. Then he spoke. You already know what happened to me. You saw it. You heard it. And some of you probably felt like it could have been you. That's because it could have. We spent too long hoping things would fix themselves. But power doesn't fix itself. People do. He paused, scanning the crowd. Faces watched with focus, nodding slowly. I'm not here for pity. I'm not here for fame. I'm here because this can't happen again. Not to me. Not to you. Not to your kids. This proposal gives the people a voice in the room where decisions are made, where truth is decided. If we want to change the system, we need to sit at the table, not wait for crumbs. The crowd clapped, but Marcus wasn't done. He continued, I gave my life to serve the city. I put on that uniform with pride. And even after what happened, I still believe in service. But respect must go both ways. The badge doesn't give you the right to break down doors without facts. It doesn't make you the judge. And it surely doesn't make you God. A woman in the crowd raised her hand and shouted, What do we do next? Marcus smiled slightly. We hold them accountable. We pass this proposal. We vote. We show up. We make noise that can't be ignored. In the days that followed, the movement grew. The footage from his neighbor's phone was shared millions of times. People began demanding more than just apologies. They wanted change. Officers involved in his raid were suspended, then fired. The police chief announced a full review of search warrant procedures. And quietly, the city council began reading every page of Marcus's oversight proposal. But Marcus stayed focused. No matter how many people supported him, he knew the system didn't bend easily. He still got messages from people telling him to move on, to stop stirring the pot. He didn't reply. He didn't have to. His actions were loud enough. One day, he returned to the police academy, not to train recruits, but to speak to them. He stood in front of the newest class of cadets. Young, hopeful faces, some nervous, some proud. He looked them over and said, Before they give you a badge, you need to understand what it means. It's not just a symbol. It's a promise. To serve. To protect. To never assume that power makes you right. If you can't do that, walk out now. Nobody moved. He went on. The night those officers raided my home, they saw my skin before they saw the address. They let fear and bias drive their actions. And because of that, they hurt someone who had worn the same uniform. Don't be those officers. Be better. Later, a cadet came up to him and whispered, Thank you for telling the truth. Marcus nodded. It's the only thing that matters. Weeks passed. The oversight proposal passed its first vote, then its second, then it became law. A small win, but an important one. It meant citizens now had a seat on the police review board. It meant body camera footage couldn't be buried. It meant every raid would require triple verification, not just a hunch and a name. It meant someone finally said, enough. Marcus sat in his home again one evening, looking at the new locks on his doors. Stronger, safer, not because he was scared, but because he had learned to expect anything. He picked up a framed photo of his parents. His father had been in the military. His mother was a teacher. Both had taught him to stand up for what's right, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. He whispered, I did it your way. Then he smiled for the first time in a long while. One day, he got invited to speak on national television, not about what happened to him, but about what he did after. The host asked, How do you stay hopeful after everything? Marcus answered, Because I saw something change. I saw people listen. I saw silence turn into action. And I believe that if we keep showing up, we'll build something stronger than fear. Another guest on the show asked, Do you still trust the police? Marcus paused and said, I trust what we can become, but trust without truth is just a lie dressed up in uniform. The audience clapped, but Marcus didn't smile for cameras. This wasn't about applause. This was about progress. Soon after, he started a program for at-risk youth, not just to keep them off the streets, but to teach them the law, their rights, and their power. He called it the Shield Within. Every weekend, teens gathered in the community center where officers and civilians talked face-to-face, without weapons, without judgment. One young boy asked him, "Do you think I could be a police commander one day?" Marcus said, "If you do it with heart, with courage, and with truth, then yes. And when you get there, you protect everyone, not just the people who look like you." The program grew. Donations came in. Volunteers stepped forward. And slowly, something new was being built. Not a wall, not a fortress, but a bridge. Back home one night, Marcus got a message from a young officer, the one who had looked at the documents that night. He wrote, "I left the force, but I joined your program. I want to be part of the solution now." Marcus replied, "That's where real strength begins." The city changed little by little. The department had new leadership, new training, more community review. It wasn't perfect. Mistakes still happened. But now they were seen. Now they were challenged. Now they had consequences. Marcus didn't want revenge. He wanted responsibility. And now, finally, it was happening. One evening, he walked through his neighborhood again. People waved. Kids ran by, laughing. One neighbor said, "Thank you for standing up. You gave us a voice." Marcus said, "You always had one. They just needed to hear it." He looked at the house where it all began. The broken door had been replaced, the scratches on the wall painted over. But he kept one mark near the entrance, a small dent left by a boot, a reminder, not of pain, but of power, the power to change. He stood there for a long time, then looked up at the sky. The storm had passed, but he had become the lightning. Thank you for listening to the full story. If this moved you, made you think, or opened your eyes, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that need to be heard. Your voice matters, and every listen helps bring truth to light. Now tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it? Drop a comment below. I want to hear your voice too.